One of the biggest advantages you can have as an applicant going into interview is being able to speak the language of residency. Now, I get this question a lot of time, and most people are worried. They're afraid of what happens on the interview day. And this is not uncommon. Almost every single person is worried before an interview. One of the reasons why you're worried is just because this is new. You have no idea what is expected of you. However, if you are able to speak the language of residency, if you are able to communicate and be sure that the other person is hearing what you are saying, then some of that fear can go away. And this, by far, will set you apart among your peers. In this video, what we're going to do is go through the majority of the lingo that is spoken in residency. The idea is that most of us, as medical students, as attendings in our country, we are already doing these things, but we might not know how to put them, So that is what we're going to address today. I'm going to go through a lot of them. However, if there's any specific questions or any specific area you need more discussions with or more clarifications, just leave your comment in the comment section. I'll address that. Now let's get to it. Now the first part is talking about where the patients go. Where do we put our patients in the hospital? So there's different terminologies we use. Most of them are very familiar to you, the inpatient, the outpatient settings. But within the inpatient settings, there are different places, there are different parts of the hospital that they are in. The wards, the ICU, the step-down units. These are the things we want to talk about right now. And the reason why we're starting with this is just because, like I said, patient care is amongst the most important things you want to talk about during interviews, right? So when you're talking about patient care, you want to be sure to address the patient's position. So for example, I say, I had this patient who was really sick. They were in the step down. I wanted to talk. I spoke with the nurses I spoke with the attendants regarding the plans to transfer them to the unit. Now, I'm trying to communicate with that person that I know what the step down is, and I know that this patient is so sick, they shouldn't be in the step down, they should be in the unit. That person automatically knows that, wow, this person is, they know. And now, why we have to talk about this is because most of us don't know that, like when I came to the US, I didn't know that I didn't know the difference between the unit, which is the ICU, and the step down unit. They kind of seem alike. I mean, where I come from, the ICU is called the ICU, and the rest part of the hospital was just called the wards. So it wasn't really clear which was which, So that's why I'm trying to make that separation for you guys. There's the ICU, but it's called the unit, which is crazy, but it's called the unit. And now there's also CCU, which is the cardiac ICU, and then when the patients are stable, they're not extremely ready, they're not like super healthy, but they are stable enough to leave the ICU. They go to a step-down unit. The step-down unit is also close monitoring, but not as close or not as sick as the patients in the ICU. That is the step-down unit. We call all those. They were all called the wards back where I come from. So if that's exactly the same thing you face, you need to try and know the difference so that when you communicate, the person can understand your intelligence and your thought process. Okay, so you might call it wards in your country, but here it's called the floor. That's where every person who is stable stays. On the floor, people who are not so sick but are sick enough to be in the hospital are there. Now in the ICU, where people that are super sick, or the CCU, that's a cardiac care unit, but people who have just like recovered from the ICU, not ready to go back to the floor, they stay in the step down unit. Okay, so when you speak, you have to let them know that, I had a patient who was super sick on the floor or on the step-down unit. I spoke with my senior, I spoke with the attendant, and then we decided to escalate the care from the floor to the step-down unit or from the floor to the CCU or ICU. That's the idea. Okay, so just understanding this will help your flow of your speech. Now, still talking about patient care. In the US, in most hospitals, in the mornings, the team comes together to have a brief meeting. They talk about patient care, what the next steps will be. And the idea is to make sure that the patient's destination, discharge, is being thought about, is being planned. Everybody, the nurses, the physician, the social worker, and sometimes physical therapy, they're all there. They are thinking about, how can we improve this patient today? How can we get them discharged? That is called a huddle. Okay? And that's just basically we looking out for our patients and trying to get them out of the hospital as soon as possible. Just because staying in the hospital portends some complications. So basically, it's just a small micro meeting of the interdisciplinary team. Everybody comes together and just talk about the patient real quick. That is called a huddle. So when you want to talk about this, you said, we had morning huddles because most of us have the same thing back home. We just call them different names, so you want to call it huddle, not meeting, not clinical meeting, So huddle. So you can give example here. I once pitched my idea during huddles and I talked about improving patients' workflow for discharge. That was initially, we had like some challenges initially, but we were able to move forward with that. And that has really improved in terms of our patient discharge and reduced our readmission rates. And that's a good segue to the next thing we want to talk about, readmission rates or readmissions. What does this mean? This basically means that now in the US, if a patient is in the hospital and you discharge them from the hospital today, if they come back to the hospital within the next 30 days, regardless of the reason, the hospital is penalized. That is called readmission. So if you discharge a patient today, doesn't matter what happens to them, they come back within 30 days back to the hospital. the hospital will be penalized. So most hospitals, most residency programs care about reducing 30-day readmission rate. And how they do this is by constantly meeting during the huddles, right? And so when you want to talk about that, because I'm sure most of us we tried to reduce readmissions back in our countries, although most of us didn't necessarily have, penalty for that. But it's a big deal here. So if you want to talk about that, you can talk about that in that way. So that you know that that's what they call readmission rates within 30 days. And you can speak, oh, my quality improvement project was about reducing 30 days readmission rate at the hospital. We specifically looked at patients that had COPD. And one of the ways that we kind of reduced this was to get on the phone and call them within the first week of discharge and have them follow up with their primary care and have them take their medications as prescribed. We also reached out to family members and we reached out to their next of kin to ensure that these practices were enforced. And that really, really helped our 30-day readmission rates. And now you're speaking the language. People are listening to you. Your interviewer is intrigued. They're like, whoa, this person is a talent. They can feel you. They understand it. They are blown. They're like, they will be smiling. Like they will be smiling from end to end. They'll be like, wow, this is somebody I want to have in my program, because now they know that this person is not starting here. This person is starting here. So this is somebody that we want to have in our program. Every single program wants that kind of residents. Every single program wants somebody who already understands this thing. Right? And you already understand it, you just need to say it. Now, knowing all these things about patient care, the next important thing is high value care. And what does that mean? Now, high value care is not as spoken as much, I would say. But basically, in the hospital, when we're in the hospital, we do a lot of testing. We do a lot of x-rays, a lot of blood tests that we don't need to do every single time. For example, one of the things that we have in the US as a big problem is that every day, patients that are in the hospital, we always order lab testing every single day, every morning. So if a patient comes into the hospital on Sunday, by the time they're leaving on Monday or the next week, Monday, they've had about 10 to 15 blood draws. Every single day, they keep getting blood. And for the most part, for most patients, this is completely unnecessary. It's complete waste of money. It's discomforting for the patient. So we try to reduce the amount of waste, financial waste, material waste, and just manpower waste. The art of trying to reduce that waste is called high value care. You are trying to, take blood from your patients as little as possible, only when necessary. You're trying to only do tests, or do scans, do CT scans or x-rays only when necessary. Reducing the unnecessary waste in general is called high value care. So, for example, if you say, I noticed that we had this problem where we had x-ray, one physician orders an x-ray, and then the next day the other physician orders another x-ray, and then the patient ends up getting 2 x-rays within the space of 2 days. So we did a QI project, and that helped us reduce the amount of waste. That really, really improved our high value care in our hospital. Now they understand that you understand, because at the end of the day, this is the biggest problem in the US. Okay, the patient care itself, and then healthcare waste. Okay, so now you are speaking the language. People are blown. People are marveled. You are doing well. The next step is understanding how the EMR works. And EMR stands for electronic medical record. And that's basically the software we use for patient care, right? And why is this important? It's important because the software in itself dictates the pace at which we can go, how fast we can go, how slow we are. It's just basically around the EMR, right? And so understanding that what's the most important part of the EMR is the workflow. What is the workflow? Now, anytime you want to speak about trying to change stuff, try to use the word workflow, because we all understand that there's a lot of moving parts, in healthcare, in patient care. There's a lot of moving parts, and you want to be cognizant of that. You want to also have the person on that side and let them know that you are aware of this. And when you talk about workflow, they know that, this person understands that there are a lot of moving parts. And there's so many parts of this workflow, from physician to nurse to physical therapy to social worker, that can be improved. And all of them rely heavily on the EMR. Okay? And so you now understand that when trying to do a QI, one of the things you like to work on is just improving the workflow in terms of the how the nurses, the physicians, the social worker, how everybody talks to themselves through the EMR, and how everybody is able to potentially improve the workflow via EMR. And that's important. Why? Because there's a lot of documentation that happens. There's so many documentations that happen in the EMR that are redundant, that are unnecessary. What do I mean by that? You have an information, the nurses put it in, the physicians put the same information in, the physical therapy put the same information in, the social worker puts the same information in. So it becomes redundant, right? One of the things that you want to combat and talk about is how you can improve the workflow by reducing the redundancy in work, so that we put in things once and then we focus on other areas that need attention. So now you understand how this thing works. Everybody likes this. Okay, and how exactly can we improve the EMR? There's so many ways. I just talked about reducing redundancy. Another language you want to speak about is bundle/order sets. What does this mean? So now, when you go into order or prescribe a medication for a patient that has sepsis, there are two ways to do it. You could say, oh, I'll order fluids, I'll order temperature check, I'll order, antibiotics, or you can just create a bundle or order set, and that you just click on it, and every single thing you need for sepsis, every single thing from ultrasound of the heart to fluids to every single thing just pops up and just comes out. And then you just check the boxes according to how your patient is, and then you submit that. That's an order set or a bundle. Why is this important? Number one, it makes our workflow faster. It reduces cognitive load, so you don't have to think as much. Number two, it makes us more accurate. So you are less likely to make errors and forget to order some test over the other. Number three, we as residents can make an order set. We can make a bundle. One of the PY projects that my team did during residency was to make a bundle. We made an order set for a specific diagnosis. So you could say, oh, yeah, one of the things I'm interested in is just looking at patients that have pneumonia and creating a bundle, an order set for them, so that when they leave the hospital, we've been able to check all the boxes and ensure that they do not come back in the hospital with relapse or remission, something. But the idea is understand that a bundle is something that residents can create themselves. You can come up with that project yourself. You can think about it and create an entire bundle and submit it to the IT department of the hospital, and they will make that bundle for you. We make it all the time. So just knowing that and knowing that can improve workflow will give you fantastic plus. Now, in addition to that, one of the things that can also make you stand out in this same area is to understand that besides the order set and bundle, there is also another thing called dot phrase. A dot phrase basically means it's a shortcut. That's what it means. For example, let me try and make this understandable. If you want to write a note for a patient that has heart failure, for example, you can write it, the same. You could type it out yourself. You could type out, oh, the patient has these symptoms and came in with that symptoms, or you can write it down and save it as a template. And then when it's time, when you see a patient that has heart failure, you just click dot heart failure, and then poof, it just pops up. And then you fill in some blank spaces. You fill in the blank spaces. You delete the things that are not in keeping with the patient, and you add the things that were not there. And that's boom, you are done. Why is this important? You could say something like, because when it comes up, like, one of the ways that I try to improve my efficiency was to create dot phrases. I created a lot of dot phrases, and I also asked some of my colleagues to help me with their own dot phrases. So that really, really boosted my efficiency, and it cut my work hours by 4 hours. Ooh, that's great. In fact, the person interviewing you will ask you, oh, when you come, can you make some dot phrases for me? That's the idea. You want to speak the language that they understand so that they will be very invested in the things you are saying. They might not remember everything you're saying, but they just remember that person just completely knew what they were saying. And once you speak people's language, you connect. And once you connect, you are ranked highly. So that, my friends, is the idea. Now, we're still talking about patient care. Remember, patient care is by far the most important thing you want to talk about on interview day. They care about your achievements, true. They care about your research, true. However, patient care is the most important thing when it comes to, in the hospital. So you want to invest in talking about patient care. Now, another important thing you need to know about patient care, a lingo that we speak, is what they call code status. And what does that mean? Now, for most of us outside the US, this is probably very, 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 very new. When I was in Nigeria, this never came up. And code status just means that when the patient comes into the hospital, you ask them a question. You ask them a question that simply put, God forbid, your heart would stop beating, or you were to pass, or I find you unconscious, I find you dead. What would you want me to do? Do you want me to do chest compressions for you, put a tube down your throat, and shock you if necessary? This is code status. They have to tell you yes or no, and it's DNR, DNI, the whole step 1, step 2-ish. But you have to ask them every single time. So even if the patient was in the hospital last week and they came back today, you have to still ask them. And that is important because of so many reasons. There's so many reasons you want to ask the patients for that, but it is important to talk about that. And why you have to know about this is because there's so many things that you can do for a patient, but it also depends on their code status. Now, if a patient was DNI, DNR, you wouldn't want to take the patients to the cath lab or take them to, take them to the ICU for heroic measures, right? You would want to pause and speak with the family, speak with the patient if the patient has capacity, and just go through what they want. Because some people, just because of their wishes, right? So having that awareness will make you stand apart, will make you stand out. And another thing is, some of the patients coming to the hospital, they are unable to give you, a concrete decision about if they want to be DNR, DNI, or they want to be full code. Now, a patient that wants everything done, that's what they call a full code. But the patient that doesn't want resuscitation is called DNR. Now, some people will say, resuscitate me for just 5 minutes. If that doesn't happen, stop. Oh, well, that's like the nitty-gritty. We can talk about that, in another video, but that's not as important as just knowing that you have to ask them, and also knowing that some of them cannot give you a decision. Those patients lack capacity, and so you have to call somebody who is their healthcare proxy, their spouse or their child, and speak to them and have them give you the decision about their code status. Like I said, the code status will determine how aggressive your heroic measures will be, and so it's important to know off the bat so that you know the things to anticipate and the things to avoid. So you can say something like, I once had a patient who came to the hospital. At the time, they lacked capacity, so we had to call their healthcare proxy, which was their daughter. And she had given us permissions to go on. She said the patient was full code, and so we intubated the patient, had her down at the ICU. She was on pressors for a while, and then came off pressors. We then transferred her to the step-down unit, and eventually she was discharged home. So that was a very fantastic experience for me, because as a resident back home or as a medical student, I kind of saw the spectrum that internal medicine or family medicine go through or experience, and that was really, really a game changer for me. That was one of the times I was like, wow, this is fantastic. The idea I'm trying to say is, when you tell your stories, try and put some elements of that language in your story. The elements of language in your story makes it stick. Now, we've talked about code status. Another thing that's important to know is code blue, which I think most people know. But the other thing that most people don't really understand is rapid response, or RRT. And code blue is just an alarm in the hospital telling everybody that somebody somewhere is thought to be dead, right? And so we're activating ACLS protocol. We're starting chest compressions. We're drawing up our epinephrine or drawing up our, medications. That's telling somebody that somebody somewhere is dead, and we have to go right away, no questions asked, right? And so that's code blue. That is how it's related to code status, because we want to know, if you are full code, then code blue it is. If you are not full code, then no code blue for you. That is why it's important to know the code status of the patient. Okay, and so just basically, code blue means time for CPR. That's what it means. So when you're talking about it, you could put that in your language, code blue. I once had a patient that we called it code blue on. I was doing chest compressions, and there was kind of we thought that all hope was lost. However, the patient turned around within a few weeks, and it was like a miracle. Till today, I still cannot put my head around what the events that happened. It was just, it was wild. That's the idea. Now, closely related to code blue is rapid response. And you can think about it as rapid response being the younger brother of code blue. Rapid response just means that somebody somewhere is crashing, not dead, but crashing fast. Let everybody come and let us find out what the next steps will be. Do we need to escalate care, take them to the ICU or CCU? Do we need to give them medications? Do we need to do any investigations? Somebody somewhere is decompensating really, really fast, and everybody needs to. And the difference between code blue and rapid response is that usually there's a rapid response team. It's usually in some hospitals is the residents. The residents are on call, are the ones who do the rapid response, or there's a rapid response team that has the residents among them, and so that team attends to the patients that is decompensating. So that's the difference. So when you want to talk about it, you say, yeah, there was this night that I had so many rapid response. I was on call. It was very brutal. I think we had about 6 rapid response, and each of them lasted for an hour. Oh my goodness! But it was tough. But one of the things that I took away from that night was just the fact that every single time when we got called, the more we got called, the more I felt comfortable and I felt confident in my ability to see patients, diagnose patients, treat patients in that time. So, it's stressful, but within that period, I could feel myself grow. So that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to show them that you have rapid response, you do rapid response, and you appreciate rapid response. Boom. Speaking the language, you're connecting with your interviewer, they're ranking you high. They're like, this candidate needs to come to this program. We cannot do without them. That's what's happening. Now, you know what code blue is. You know what rapid response is. Another thing that is important to know is STAT. STAT. And what does that mean? It just basically means that you want to have this patient given this medication or tested for, check their blood count, whatever order you want to give them. You want the lab to prioritize that order. You want the lab to do that test first. So you put a STAT order, STAT. It means that I want this done now. And like when I train, back in Nigeria and in most places in the world, I don't know if this is the exact word that we use, but we just went down to the lab or we called the lab and like, oh yeah, I need this right now. We didn't have a specific start for them. But yeah, that's one thing you have to also know. And so when you are doing a code blue or you're doing a rapid response, you order your orders are all stats. And by the way, I don't think I explained what an order is. An order is just an order, ORDER, just means that you want someone to do something for you. Maybe the nurse, maybe the physical therapy, maybe the lab, but I don't know why it's called an order, but yeah, it's just basically, hey, help me take blood counts, take some blood tests, do x-ray. They are all called order. Now, we've talked about patient care, and I am hoping that by this time you feel grounded in the ways to talk around patient care. You already have the experience. You just need to know the things you just need to know the lingo and how they reflect in your own story so that you can import some of this lingo and use it when you speak. Now, we've talked about patient care. The next thing we want to talk about is very, very important. We want to talk about the interdisciplinary team. We want to talk about every other person that makes the patient care experience fantastic. The nurses, the physical therapy, every single body. We want to talk about the language that we use when we speak to them or when we refer to them. The one that confused me the most was the social worker. And the social workers are basically in the hospital, and sometimes it's difficult to differentiate them between the nurses and the social worker. Sometimes it's difficult to differentiate. But what the social worker does is organizing the social aspect, literally the social aspect of the patient. So for patients that have trouble with finance, with housing, with support systems, transportation, they are responsible. That's what they do. They look at, oh, this patient is about to be discharged. Do they have a house they're staying? Do they have finances? Do they have food in their house? Do they have someone helping out when they go back home? That is the job of those people. So when you talk, you want to be able to recognize that when patients leave the hospital, it doesn't end there. There's so many other factors that makes them come back to the hospital, or that makes them not live a good quality life outside the hospital. And one of the ways to strengthen that aspect is by working with the social workers, right? And so this is something that you have to be aware of. You have to know what the social workers do. Then you have to know how to improve the social worker, you have to know how to improve the patient's outcomes from the perspective of the social worker, So if you have a patient, for example, I had this patient that was always coming back to the hospital. We treated them, and within a week, they're back to the hospital. I then found out from the social worker that they did not have a good support system. However, upon digging deep, the social worker and we found out that actually they weren't using the resources we had given them. And so we then showed them how to use it and then connected them with the resources, and that completely changed their story. We haven't seen them in a while, and it's been one of our success stories. So anytime we have a social problem, patients that have social problems, or patients that always get readmission, we try to look at it from a different perspective, from a lens that is outside the hospital, because the most part of care happens outside the hospital. Okay, now you are seeing what I'm saying. Another important person that takes care of the patient in the hospital is called the physical therapist, or PT/OT. There's a physical therapist, and then there's the occupational therapist. We mostly call them PT, OT, and they take care of the mobility of the patient. So when you see the patient, you've told the patient the plan. We'll give you antibiotics, we'll give you fluids, we'll do an ultrasound of your heart, we'll have you do a CT scan of your chest. When you're done, the physical therapist, they come and they take the patients, they take the patients around the wards to assess them and see how they're able to walk. The physical therapists are also the ones that give recommendations in saying, oh, this patient isn't doing so well. I don't think they can go back home. Probably they need to go to rehab, or they need to go to a nursing facility. The physical therapist and the occupational therapist kind of work hand in hand. While the physical therapist, they do mostly mobility of the large joints, the occupational therapists are mostly concerned of smaller joints, like the joints of the hands, joints of the foot, but basically they work hand in hand, and they're part of the team that determines where the patient goes to after they leave the hospital, just based on their functionality while in the hospital. So when you are making plans to talk about where you want the patient to go, and you have trouble with that, you could say, oh, we didn't ask the physical therapist and the occupational therapist about their thought process regarding this patient, because at the time, we're not entirely sure if this patient was a good candidate to go back home. And then we got input from the physical therapist, and their recommendation was to go to a nursing home. And that brings us to another important thing, another important lingo called SNF, SNF, SNF. That is a skilled nursing facility. And that's a place we usually discharge patients to when we think that they are ready to leave the hospital, but they're not ready to go home. They are still weak. They need some, more 2-3 weeks of physical therapy. So we send them to SNF. So that's how we basically do it. They need a few more. So you could talk about that. SNF just simply stands for skilled nursing facility, and that's where we send patients that are ready to leave the hospital but not ready to go home. Okay, and if we think that the patient is not ready to go home, but are not sick enough to be in the skilled nursing home, we send them to acute rehab. In acute rehab, they just get lots of rehab, they get lots of physical therapy to get them strong enough to go home eventually. So that's basically speaking the language of residency. If you are able to hone down this vocabulary, you should be good. Now, I just talked about rehab, SNF, home. What does all this mean? The word we use for this to describe where the patient is going after discharging them, that is called the disposition. So the attendant can ask you, what do you think this disposition of this patient is? You say, oh, home. Okay, let's send them home. Basically, it's what it means. Where is the patient going after recovering from the hospital? We call it disposition. Now, it makes sense. It's logical. But just so you know, we call it disposition, even though it's logical. And now we're talking about the disposition. We're talking about rehab, home, SNF. That's good. Who plans this disposition? That is the case manager. So the person that plans the disposition is the case manager. And how do they do this? When the physical therapists, the PTOT, have seen the patient and they've discussed with the physician, they say, okay, this patient is going to rehab. The case manager then gets on the phone, calls the rehab, say, we have a patient for you. Do you have bed? They'll be like, oh, we don't have bed. We'll call back in 24 hours. And then they'll be okay. And then they make plans for the patients to leave the hospital. That's the case manager. It always confused me, actually, the case manager versus the social worker, but actually it's completely different. Now, I recognize that this may be a lot. This is new language. This is dense, full of new information. What I want you to do is this. You could break it down and watch this video multiple times. You don't have to watch every single thing at a time, but you could watch it every single time you have an interview, so that when you are coming up with your responses, you could substitute your vocabulary and see how they flow. This is not meant to be a video that you want to watch once and say, oh, I'm done. No, you want to watch it so that, repetition just makes it better. So I recognize that this is a lot, don't get me wrong. And I'm not asking you to use all the languages, but you could use a few, and just using a few will completely change the game. Okay. Now, we've talked about patient care. We've talked about the interdisciplinary team. The next thing we want to talk about is just the overall things that go on in the hospital from day to day that residents do. One of the first things is that after you've seen a patient, you have to discuss that patient with your attending. You have to come and tell them formally, I've seen this patient, I have a plan for the patient, can we talk about that patient? That process of talking with your attending and registering that patient with the attending is called staffing. Doesn't make sense, but that's what it's called. So I'll say, I saw this patient, and after I was done seeing the patient, I then staffed the patient with my attending, and he was impressed with my plan, although he thought that we should switch. Instead of using normal saline, we should use Ringer's lactate. You get the point? So that they know that you know what staffing is, basically, just what it is. But staffing just means registering a patient with the attending. It's like presenting to them. Now, I said attending, and that's what I want to talk about next, attending. The attending is any board-certified physician, right? Back home, we use the word consultant. I will avoid using consultant when I speak, just because it's not the language. Now, most of them might know what the consultant is, and it's no problem. And I don't think they would necessarily, rate you poorly. I just think that saying attending just makes the person more in flow with you, because you don't want to disrupt their thought process. They will have to think about what a consultant is and then interpret what a consultant is into an attending in their brain. In that microsecond, they probably didn't listen to the next things you said. So you want to just keep their flow in a steady state, right? So yeah, the consultants are attendings here. And it's really, really confusing. It's really confusing because back home, it's only people who are specialists, people who did cardiology, who did nephrology, who did, surgery that are consultants. Every other person is not necessarily a consultant, so it's difficult. But here, every single person is an attending, okay? You may be an attending cardiologist, okay? You may be an attending hospitalist, okay? Maybe a primary care physician, or whoever it is, as long as they're board certified, they are all attendings. By the way, I'm an attending, just so you know. But the point I'm trying to make is, avoid the word consultant, and it's not because it's bad, just for the study slate, just allow them not lose you when you're talking. The only time you use the word consultant, well, not consultant, the only time we use the word consult is when you need the input of a specialist. It's confusing, but just stay with me. Nobody is a consultant per se. They are specialists, not even specialists. We don't even use the word specialist. Everybody's an attending. However, when you're in the hospital, there's a team taking care of a patient, and you need the input of, let's say, a cardiologist. You have to then you request for a consult. And that means I requested for cardiology to see this patient. And so you could say, yeah, there was this patient that we had troubles with. There was a lot of back and forth about what the primary cause of their chest pain was. And so we consulted cardiology, and cardiology had said that it was non-cardiac chest pain. And so we had the trouble because we did know that it was not cardiac chest pain, but it wasn't clear. You get the point? So you want to show that you know what a consult is. A consult just means what we do back home. And now let's talk about the things that residency find very, very attractive. Now, every single thing I've talked about, they find attractive. Now let's look at one that's very peculiar to residency itself. And I'll list them real quick, and we'll go through them real quick. Number one, it's sign out. What does that mean? Sign out just basically means that at the end of, so let me give you a description of what it is. When I come to the hospital 7 o'clock in the morning, I see patients, and then by 6 o'clock in the evening, I'm ready to go. But before I leave, there's a team that's coming back. There's another team that's coming in the evening by 6 p.m. I'll have to go and speak with them and tell them about all the patients that I have, the things that I want them specifically to do overnight. I'll say, this patient is sick, please help me check the blood counts. This patient is unstable, please help me talk to the attending. This patient needs this, please help me do that. That's what they call a sign out. And it is very important because sign out is where mistakes happen. You have to know what a sign out is. I think back in my country, we called it handover, but here it's called a sign out. So you do the same thing at home. You just call it different name, handover. Now, try not to call it handover, call it sign out. The reason why you want to know sign out is because one of the ways to improve patient care is to improve sign outs. If the team is able to communicate clearly and decisively to the next team about what they want to be done on their patient, it reduces the amount of errors we make. So if you want to talk about how to improve, or your thought process about improving workflow, patient care, you can talk about the sign outs. Okay. Another lingo, which is very important, is the block schedule. And what's a block schedule? Basically, it's just block schedule, and that means that everybody's schedule is put in a block. Some programs have every 2 weeks, but most programs have 4 weeks. You know, like when I was in residency, our block schedule was 4+1. That means that every single time you started a rotation, that rotation lasted for 4 weeks. And then you had 1 week of clinic, and then 4 weeks of something else, and then 1 week of clinic, and then 4 weeks of something else. So you could ask the question is, how flexible is the block schedule? You know, so that's what I'm trying to say. Now, don't go asking questions like that, because people don't want people that are thinking about flexibility of block schedules off the bat, but you get the point. The point is speaking in the language that people understand. Okay. And of course, we have the quality improvement, which is the QI project, or the QI. QI just is a task that you take upon yourself and say, I want to improve patient care. I want to improve the experience of patient. How do I do that? As a resident, the way to do that is by doing a quality improvement project. And basically, it's just finding the problem, finding out how to solve the problem and ways to solve the problem, and then starting the process of solving the problem. So if you want to talk about, regarding the disposition of patients, I think one of the QIs that I'm thinking about is having to speak with the social workers and also improving workflow, so that at the end of the day, patients' disposition is improved, their experience outside the hospital is secured, and we feel like we've given great care. You see what I'm saying? But yeah, quality improvement, QI, is one of the ways that residents can improve the program, improve patient care, and also get some research. So we could talk about that for sure. Another thing is didactics. Didactics is just, everybody knows about this. Didactics is conferences that programs do. It's morning, most times it's in the morning. You know, my program was very strong in didactics, and really that was one of the things that I loved about my program. So you could ask about questions like, you know, what are the main focus of the didactics, you know, just as a question, because my understanding is it seems like a lot of residents have keen interest in primary healthcare. And so does the didactic, you know, focus on that area, or do you guys have a specific, just broad didactics approach, or you have like a schedule regardless of residents' interest? Those are the kind of things that you could talk about. But didactics, it's something I think everybody should look for in programs, just based on ranking, because the stronger the didactics, the better for you. Now, when you speak like this, I guarantee you that the person listening will be glued to their screen. They will be marveled. They will be interested in the things that you have to say. And that's the idea. You want to get as many unfair advantages as you can. You want to speak the language so that by the time you've had 2-3 interviews, you almost feel like you have been ranked to match. You know, you don't want to be the person that needs to get 1,000 interviews to match, you know, and you also want to be the person that matches at the program that you want to match. So being able to pick up these tricks, being able to pick up these skills will really, really help your cause. And I am opening slots, limited slots for interview practices. The link is in the description. Just click and download the link. Don't forget, this is not an exhaustive video, and you're not supposed to know all this lingo at a go. You could take your time and rewatch it. Keep practicing mock interviews. Do not stop. Just keep practicing. The more you practice, the more comfortable you'll be. Wishing you guys good luck in the match. We shall celebrate your victory. And as usual, I'll see you in the next one.